With only 700 men with him, Napoleon escaped the island of Elba on February the 26th, 1815. 2 days later, he would arrive on the coast of France at Gulf Juan and began to march north. As soon as word had reached France that Napoleon had escaped the island, the 5th Regiment moved in to intercept him and capture the former emperor. Marshal Ney, who had told King Louis XVIII that he would successfully capture Napoleon and bring him back to Paris in a cage, led the regiment. But upon having both sides on March the 7th meet, Napoleon would dismount his horse, walk towards the men of the 5th Regiment, and, without any weapons in hand, shout towards them, "The Emperor is here! Shoot me!" And, instead of shooting him, the Frenchmen immediately started to cheer out, "Vive l'Empereur!" and effectively switched sides, joining Napoleon. Marshal Ney, forgetting his promise to the French king, kissed cheeks with the Emperor and also switched side, and the two men would ride towards Paris together. As they marched towards the capital city, Napoleon's army began to grow, as veterans of the Grande Armée would rejoin the ranks, falling in line with Napoleon. Meanwhile, the Congress of Vienna would declare the French emperor an outlaw. And with word spreading quickly about his escape, the Allies pledged to field an army of 150,000 men to end his reign once and for all. On March 20th, 1815, Napoleon entered Paris to a hero's welcome. And by June, he had amassed an army of 200,000 men at his disposal. Napoleon realized that with the Allies trying to form their own coalition force once more, time was of the essence. He had to try to break the Allied army before they had a chance to coalesce. As such, he moved on the offensive, planning to drive a wedge between the British Expeditionary Force and the Prussians, which were beginning to come from the east. Marching into Belgium, Napoleon would begin a battle of maneuver by trying to find the right place to fight the Duke of Wellington. Wellington, however, decided to find ground of his own choosing, a place where he could ideally defend and hold on to the French army, effectively keeping them in one spot, while the Prussians, under the command of Blücher, would be able to attack. At a small town called Waterloo, the British set up their defensive lines, along with the Dutch and other allies who were there. Napoleon would attempt to break the British lines, sending wave after wave after them on June the 18th, 1815. And yet, every time the French armies were sent in, they could not break the British line. As the day wore on, the Prussians would arrive, flanking Napoleon on the right and effectively breaking his line there. Napoleon had effectively been defeated at Waterloo, and this battle would be devastating, as many of the veterans who had fought with Napoleon in many of his campaigns over the last 20 years had been killed in one single battle. Forced to retreat, Napoleon attempted to regroup his army and find a new way to break the Allies. But no sooner did he return to Paris than he discovered that both the legislature and the people of the city had turned on him. The overwhelming defeat had shattered their perspectives on just how invincible Napoleon was, and that instead of bringing French glory, he was going to be bringing French defeat. Napoleon had forgotten that nearly 20 years earlier, his own grasp upon power was always going to be dependent upon how successful he was. The French people during the Revolution were always wary of their leaders, especially if they could not win. Once again, Napoleon would be forced to abdicate the throne on June the 22nd, 1815. And once more, he hoped that his son would continue to rule as Emperor of France. But the Allies made no false hint about it. They fully intended to restore the monarchy of Louis XVIII to the throne of France. Fleeing to Malmaison, only about 11 kilometers away from Paris, Napoleon would soon learn that the Prussians had been given orders to capture him, dead or alive. Realizing that if the Prussians captured him alive, he might end up dead far quicker, he decided it was necessary to make a well-timed retreat. Where would he go? That was the question. The obvious answer would be to the United States, where he could attempt to perhaps reform a new empire, and, once reestablished, perhaps even return to Europe. Napoleon would travel to Rochefort, port city that he hoped to make an escape from, but discovered that the Royal Navy had blockaded every port in France so that he could not escape. Realizing there was nowhere else to go, Napoleon would surrender himself to Captain Frederick Maitland on the HMS Bellerophon on July the 15th, 1815. And his time as Emperor of France, within the nation of France, was finally over. For more information, please consider these suggested titles. Be sure to click on the left-hand side of the screen to subscribe to our show, and on the right-hand side for our latest episode. And we will see you again for the next episode of Milling Through History.